Welcome, everyone. Welcome. We'll pause for another minute to let people join. Hopefully, you're at the right place. We are the National Association of State Boards of Education conducting our webinar today on strengthening school community connections for student success. We are joined by our amazing partners at the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement, as well as the Afterschool Alliance and Francisco Escobedo, who is a member of the California State Board of Education. Again, we'll pause for another 30 seconds to let people join in. We are really glad you've taken time out of your busy schedules. We know you have choices about where you could be at this particular moment. We're glad that you chose to be with us. My name is Paulo Di Maria. I'm the president and CEO of the National Association of State Boards of Education. Those of you who don't know about State Boards of Education, shame on you. NAFSCE is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We're the only organization that is focused solely on supporting the citizen leaders that serve on state boards of education. State boards, as you likely are aware, play a role in helping to strengthen the public education systems in their respective states so that all students from all backgrounds and circumstances are prepared to be successful in school, in work, and in life. Today's webinar is called Strengthening School Community Connections for Student Success. Let me go through a few norms for this particular experience today. First of all, the webinar is being recorded and the recording will be distributed afterwards. Closed captioning has been enabled for those who like to use that feature. Use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen if you're using a desktop to submit your questions at any time. And then look to the chat box for resource links. We'll be putting resource links in the chat all throughout today's presentation. To introduce the topic, I gotta say, I love this topic. I love this topic because it's all about partnerships and working together beyond the walls of the school in order to create the greatest learning experience and in some ways the greatest living experience for our students in order to ensure their success. Today's webinar is really a derivative from one of the issues of our flagship publication, the State Education Standard. The January edition this past year was called Connecting Schools and Communities. And it featured a number of articles. We got a lot of great feedback about it. The reason we chose this topic is because state boards of education are constantly talking to us about things that they can do to improve outcomes for students. And this idea of making connections with communities and families especially is always front and center in the way State Board of Education members think. And so this issue had a number of different articles, three of which are actually are driving what we're going to present to you today. It's about the California community schools, it's about family engagement policies, and after school learning. So I commend you. You have the QR code there. Please, scan it. You can also find it at NASB.org under our publications tab, and so forth and so on. So let's get to the meat of the presentation. We are just thrilled to have an amazing set of presenters and panelists. I'm going to start by introducing Maggie, Caspe, and Reyna Hernandez, who are both from the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement. Maggie's the senior researcher there, and Reyna is their senior director of research and policy. They're going to start us off with a few presentations about not only their organization, but some of the work they've done in the family, community, and school engagement in terms of their article about key state policies that can help promote that. And then Francisco Escobedo is a member of the California State Board of Education. He also is a strong believer in the power and has a lot to say about the great community schools program and infrastructure that's going in place in California. And then Jodi Grant is the executive director of the Afterschool Alliance, another key component of this conversation because those after-school programs are both another way to care for students, but bring in that family and that community engagement to create even more extended learning opportunities that continue to help students succeed. So with that, Maggie, I'm going to turn it over to you to get us started.
Thanks so much for that, Paulo. And thank you for having us here today. I'm Maggie Caspe, and I'm a senior researcher here at NAFSCE, as we like to call ourselves. As you can see on the screen, our mission is really to advance high-impact policies and practices for family, school, and community engagement to promote child development and improve student achievement. And on the next screen, what you're going to see is, as we always think it's a little bit helpful to set the stage for a discussion like this, is our definition of family engagement. And when we think about family and community engagement, the definition that we and many others in the field use is that it's a shared responsibility among families, schools, and communities to support student learning. So in this way, family and community engagement, it's not a one-size-fits-all model, program, or service, but it's really the ways that families guide, make choices about, support, and advocate for their children's learning. And for schools and communities, it's about reaching out to families to build deep, reciprocal, trusting relationships, and really to communicate in ways that ensure that families are critical partners in their students' success. And just to be clear here, what we're talking about is not to be confused with efforts that operate under the guise of parental rights that are designed to polarize and divide schools and communities. What we're really talking about is families and educators and communities collaborating and partnering together. On the second slide, you're going to see the second important thing to know about family engagement, which is that it takes place across settings everywhere all the time, not just in schools. And there's really this misconception out there that family engagement is what happens in schools at parent-teacher conferences and the such. But I always come back to the statistic on the screen, which is that of the 6,000 waking hours students have available to them each year, really only 1,000 of them are spent in school, leaving 5,000 hours for students to really explore their interests and learn in spaces outside of school, like in religious institutions, camps, libraries, museums, parks, and as you're going to hear from Jodi and Francisco, in after-school programs and through community school extended programming. So just as learning takes place everywhere and all the time, so too does family engagement, because families are constantly making decisions about where children and youth might spend their time, connecting to those spaces, and in many cases, advocating for them to be available where they're not. The third tenet on the next screen is really that family engagement takes place across time. Research clearly shows that family engagement matters from birth through adulthood. And while the shape and form of that engagement is going to look different at different developmental stages, it really never stops being important and one of the strongest predictors of student achievement. And that brings me to the next slide, and probably one of the most important, which is that when practiced in the ways that I've described, research shows a number of positive benefits of family and community engagement for everyone involved. For students, it leads to improved outcomes. For teachers, it leads to increased job satisfaction and really the reduced likelihood of leaving the profession. For families, it leads to increased family well-being. And we also know that family engagement makes communities healthier and increases opportunities for them to thrive in ways that benefit children and youth. But what you're going to see on the next screen is that despite all we know, family and community engagement, and you all who are on here probably, know this, is that, family and community engagement is often at the margins of school practice. And while I don't have a lot of time to get into all of the reasons here, we know that part of the reason schools sometimes struggle to engage families is that there are very few conditions in place that support them doing so. And just a few cases in point. You can see on the screen from some of our own original research, we find that fewer than 4 out of 10 family-facing professionals believe that they've had sufficient preparation and opportunities to practice and learn how to engage families. The next slide shows a report that we wrote that reviewed state licensure standards across all 50 states and territories. We find that only 30% actually explicitly address training teachers in elements that are essential to family engagement. And these are fun. On the next slide, you're going to see a table that comes from data that were just released last week from IES's School Pulse Panel Survey. And of the 1,500 schools who were surveyed, 6 in 10, that's 60%, reported that it was somewhat or very difficult to engage their students' families with their school. And another disappointing finding on the next slide is that for this school year, only 39% of schools have a family engagement specialist or outreach worker at their school, which is a decrease from 44% during the last school year. And although schools with higher neighborhood poverty are overall more likely to have staff and family serving roles, the decrease there is still apparent. So on the next slide, you'll see that while there's clearly a lot of work to do, I'm going to hand it over to Reyna Hernandez, who is NAFSCE's Senior Director of Research and Public Policy, and the lead author on our recent paper for the standard. And she's going to share a few ideas for how states can start to build better family engagement policies, and some bright spots where we see this being done.
Thank you so much, Maggie. I am going to talk just a little bit about, so much of what Maggie talked about is, this is relational work. It really is very local and oftentimes requires the, the consistency and practitioners to really start to build relationships with families. But there are conditions that need to be in place when we look at the research that really matter in order to make this successful and to set up the conditions that are needed, both from an organizational perspective and process conditions. And we see that in the research, and we see that in the dual capacity framework that was developed by Dr. Karen Mapp. And so there is a role to be played by state leaders, whether you are a member of a state board of education or providing information to state boards, providing information to legislatures, or someone within a state legislature. All of these, all of the conditions that I'm about to talk about will go very, very, very briefly over 8 things that we think could be done to try to reduce barriers and create a supportive environment, so that at the local level, practitioners can really connect with families, support families, and build partnerships with not only families, but also after school providers and programs like the ones that we'll hear about in just a little bit. So I'll talk about on the next slide. The first 3 areas really support infrastructure and actions that states can take that help to support making sure that at the state level, there is the type of finance and resource, but also that there's the staff capacity to be able to support and do this work. So when we talk about budgetary support at the state level, that can look like funding a position to have someone that is dedicated to and focused on family and community engagement efforts. That can also include programming dollars that are able to make their way down to the field to support local initiatives. When we talk about organizational leadership, it's not only having a position, sometimes having an office of family and community engagement, which some states have, and I'll talk about that in just a second, but it's also where that's positioned. Family and community engagement isn't just about communications and outreach. It's also about really thinking about the programmatic connections, because so many educational programs reach and touch families and have programming requirements and components that link families to learning. It's also about leveraging some of the engagement infrastructures. And what we mean by that is, how are states being responsive to, hearing from, and communicating with the field, families from across the state and from across different demographics? So sometimes this can look like advisory councils. It can look like having a parent, we've seen parent cabinets be established, or sometimes governor's offices may have children's cabinets that include education. So if we go on to the next slide, I'll give just a few examples. In Nevada, there is an office, the Office of Parental Involvement and Family Engagement, which is a legislated office. And one of the things that's so exciting about the work in Nevada, they've been doing a lot of work with educator preparation. And you see that partnership reflected at the senior level with a deputy that is addressing both educator effectiveness and family engagement. So that senior level strategy and connection to family engagement is just so key. In Colorado, there's an Office of Family, School, and Community Partnerships that was also legislated. They have a budget, a very clear role, a director, and for years they've been carrying out some amazing work. In Michigan, they developed a state family engagement framework, which I'll talk a little bit more about in just a second. And to give that framework life, they've made very large budgetary investments to then have regional family engagement centers throughout the state. Going on to the next section, I just mentioned family engagement frameworks. So we're going to talk about two things here. One is having a state level framework that really brings together the understanding of different people involved around what family and community engagement is, what matters, how to support it, and what kind of resources already exist within the state that families can draw on, that practitioners can draw on, and that can be tied and linked to bigger strategies. If the state is focusing on college and career readiness or chronic absenteeism, then those frameworks can link strategies on how family and community engagement can support and reinforce those outcomes, support reading, family math. Then when we talk about state plans, and you'll see more about this in the article, we're thinking about the different ways that, as states during the pandemic developed ARP plans, there are school improvement plans, there are state ESEA plans. Each of those should have connections to not only the family and community engagement strategies that support and reinforce their major outcomes, but also involvement and engagement in the development of those plans from families and communities. We go on to the next slide. You'll see an example, the dual capacity framework, of a framework that we see a lot throughout the country that's being used nationally. But then next slide, many states have gone on to develop frameworks. We've worked with 18 different states, though there are many others that have developed a framework to really be able to speak to their priorities. On the screen here, you'll see a variety of frameworks, including Massachusetts, Kansas. Next slide. Kansas actually has not only a state framework for family engagement, but they've gone on to speak to the very specific priorities of how family engagement ties back to their state strategic plan. And so you'll see on the right, you see the broad elements of their state strategic plan, their vision for education. And that very first area is relationships between staff, students, families, community partners. Yep. And that is a pillar of how they're carrying forward their outcomes and objectives. On the next slide, you'll see evaluating engagement in preparation and teacher training. A lot of what Maggie talked about was the importance of educator preparation. We've found in our studies that there are major gaps. Next slide. If you go to, we've spent a lot of work in this area, and there are a variety of examples of different resources here on the screen that you can find there. A few of the ones across the top to support state work. The State of the States report speaks to how licensure and professional standards can better reflect family and community engagement. And that way we're training teachers from the beginning and building expectations and supporting and reinforcing their capacity. The next thing that you'll see on the screen is a framework around educator preparation that speaks to state policies. So definitely something to look out for. And then on this slide, you see focusing on engagement both within accountability and improvement systems and across standard development and implementation, all roles that state boards of education often consider and weigh in on. I'm going to give just a couple of examples of those on the next slide. When we talk about accountability systems, that could look a variety of different ways, but I'm in Illinois, and a couple of Illinois examples. You'll see the top left of the screen, the 5 Essentials survey as part of state report cards that often, are used as part of accountability systems, and we're part of the state's ESEA plan. You see the 5 Essentials survey, which is a culture survey that includes surveying of families and with older youth as well, and includes elements of family and community engagement and relational trust as a major foundation. You also, I think this is also an area as we talk about really being able to support and integrate family and community engagement into programming. One example in Illinois, for example, is how we supported immigrant families in very intentional ways, not only providing bilingual education services to students, but also helping inform families on what that looked like. And that beautiful picture that you see at the bottom is about 1,500 families, parent leaders from across the state, multilingual leaders coming together at a parent summit annually to learn about bilingual education, to learn about resources for their community, and bring all that information back. So here were just a few ways we wanted to lay the foundation and context, and I'll hand it back over so that we can get to the panel.
Great, thank you, Reyna. That was amazing and quick summary of those 8 different elements. And again, just to remind folks, we will make available to you not only a link to the publication, which I think might already be in the chat that highlights those 8 areas, but the slides that have been presented. So, to me, one of the things that I love when we talk about policy is that, I'm always curious about how does that manifest itself in reality. And so for that reason, that's why we have Francisco Escobedo with us, because California has really been seen as a leader in promoting the ideas that have just been covered in terms of family, school, and community engagement, and doing it under this moniker of community schools. So Francisco, talk a little bit about a little bit about the genesis of the idea of community schools and how California has been taking, and I think this speaks to several of the policy ideas that Reyna brought up, is being very specific and deliberate at a state level to create the conditions to nurture those kinds of strong family and community bonds.
Of course, Paulo. And I just want to say, my father used to say, if you want to know the heart of a person, follow the checkbook. And California invested $4.1 billion in community schools, far above any investment, in our nation. So as California, we really believe in community schools. And before being a board member, I used to be a superintendent. And my district was one of the few that were a positive outlier district due to the LPI study, the Learning Policy Institute study. One of the findings were the strong relationships that we had with our parents, with our community assets, and so forth. So I know firsthand how powerful it is to have the voices, especially the voices of our marginalized parents and members to be part of the process to ensure that all students will thrive. So I just wanted to share that, and I have brought that passion to the board, and we have just an amazing board with President Linda Darling Hammond leading the way. So there are 4 California what we call school pillars, and I'm not sure if you can see the slide, but yeah. So these pillars, the first one is called what we call the integrated student supports, right? And I think you heard it from our previous speakers. How do we integrate the academic, the physical, the social, emotional, and health needs? And our statute defines this, including the coordination of trauma-informed health, mental health, social services. So really creating a holistic approach in diagnosing students' needs, both academically and physically. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar is family and community engagement, actually tapping into the expertise and knowledge of family community members, creating what we call these councils that meet every month, every week to support and educate students. You know, statute defines this as home visits, homeschool collaboration, culture responsive community partnerships, and then the third pillar is that collaborative leadership and practices, right? Creating a culture of professional learning, collective trust, and shared responsibilities. They're, part of the grant explicitly says that there has to be a community school coordinator at the district level for this type of collaboration to happen. And then finally, that extended learning time and opportunity, right? That academic support really focus on enrichment as well as intervention, having real world relevant opportunities, internships, project-based learning. So statute refers this as opportunities to both extended learning and expanded learning, before, after school, summer programs. It also includes tutoring and other learning supports as well. So the next slide gives you kind of a picture, a really nice construct of what we're doing. And in the middle, if you go on to the next slide, is that the why. I'm sorry, the one previously, the why is all students flourish in thriving communities, and the yellow is why we do this work. The orange is who drives this work, and you can see it is not just the principal, right? It's the principal, it's the coordinators, it's community partners, and students are very important in these what we call councils, right? The youth and families. We really want students to be able to bring ideas to, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong, right? And then we have some key practices and how we do these things. Things like creating asset mapping, community service asset mapping is one, having site-based advisory councils, for example. So we've mapped out this as a way to ensure that transformation happens, you know.
Francisco, I want to stay on this slide for a minute because I want to talk a little bit about, I mean, what I always emphasize to people is this is very not only deliberate in the way it's created and executed, but also it sort of requires that it be infused, woven into the fabric of the school, right? It's not a collection of one-offs, right? Oh, yeah, we have our after school program coordinator down the hall. That happens at such and such a time. I'm a teacher. I don't really know about that. I don't really, integrate with it or whatever. Oh yeah, we've got we've got this program over here for, we've got a family engagement coordinator down the hall. They do these things. That means I don't have to worry about it. It's just the opposite. Everybody understands, right? Speak a little bit, especially in particular to your leadership in your district and your schools. How do you create that culture that really values family and community engagement in all its, sort of manifestations?
That's a great question. And part of it has to be interwoven in the DNA of our system. It's supposed to disrupt the system, right? Is as when we look at student data, like data systems, it's not just achievement data. We're looking at other data, such as, what are those SEL components with the child? What type of family structure have they gone to access our support system. So we definitely look at students beyond a number. We want to know their support systems at home. What are the support systems in the neighborhood as well? Are they accessing them? So it's really looking at not just the whole child, but the whole neighborhood, so that just looking at data in a very different way, and then and then how do we hear student voices? It just can't be looking at a survey. Is how do we look at our student leaders and really ask some questions, what we're doing right, what are we doing wrong, and help them help us design a better system
Right,
at
right.
school. So it's really listening, understanding, and having these key people as part of your decision-making process, right? So,
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I love that. I love that because it's so important. Sometimes you'll go to a school and say, what do you have in terms of family community engagement? And it'll be very like we send this information home with kids, or we have, parent conferences and things like that. But
right.
it's really the two-way communication, both from the community side and the family side, that's really so important.
Exactly. And it needs to be interwoven in our critical plans as well, like
Yeah, yeah,
LCAP and so forth. So it's supposed to disrupt the system.
yeah.
And that's what we're attempting to do in California.
I'm going to turn to Jodi now,
Sure.
with the Afterschool Alliance. Because those after-school opportunities really create so much, a tremendous opportunity to link with community-based organizations. Again, another way to bring communities in that supplements both sort of the learning time as well as the learning opportunity. Jodi, talk to us a little bit about what the After School Alliance is all about and the kinds of policy things that you see happening across the country.
Right. So thank you so much. And I did want to say, after school is a tremendous opportunity. I love the slide earlier where you talk about 5,000 hours that our students have when they are not in the classroom. And throughout that time, there's opportunities to learn, and they can be learning really positive things with positive role models, caring adults, developing relationships with their peers, supporting their academics, or they could be learning things that we'd rather them not be learning, or spending time on social media. So I think, more and more we're seeing huge awareness on the part of parents that they want their kids to have access to high quality after school summer learning programs so that we can make the most of these hours. And the truth is, in this world that we live in now, those extra hours are essential. So the kinds of learnings, the attachments, the passions that often happen in an expanded learning program and an after school program help shape the students and their success of the future. It may be where that light bulb spark goes off for a particular career or particular passion. So, in light of all that, and we can move to our first slide, the sad reality is that far too many of our students don't have access to after school. So as you can see from this slide, it's almost 25 million students whose parents say they want their kids to have access to after school, but they don't have it. And we have this data for every single state, and we can break it down all sorts of different ways, including, opportunities for STEM learning, health and wellness. So I encourage all of you to go to our webpage and see the information that is state specific. I also want to say that, when we're looking at how do we really reach these almost 25 million kids, the partnerships are essential, because when we're talking about after school and partnerships, we're talking about community-based organizations, but that goes beyond, like, you have Boys and Girls Clubs, YMCA, mentoring organizations, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, but we're also talking about libraries, parks and recs, community colleges, science centers, businesses that might be employing our youth. So it is, it's the ability to really involve an entire community in the learning of our students is extraordinary. And that also has long-time benefits for relationships between the community, between students, and ideally finding ways for many of these students, particularly those in more rural areas, to find careers that are home and not leave. So so a lot of reasons why we want to attack this number. Next slide. One thing we found during COVID was that it was the after-school programs that were really the first responders. So when we were looking at essential workers, where did their kids go? It was the after-school providers that started running programs all day long to take care of the children of essential workers. That quickly expanded to what we called after-school hubs, places where many of our students who, for a variety of reasons, couldn't learn virtually, could go to these hubs and do virtual learning and then do enrichment after the virtual learning. And so what we have seen, we actually did a poll of voters after the election, because we were really curious in this election year what voters thought about education after school. And these are the highest numbers we've ever seen in the 25 years that we've been in an organization. So 9 in 10 voters, and this is all across the country, rural, urban, suburban, Republican, Independent, Democrat, nearly 90% say after school is an absolute necessity. And 80% is actually 85% want more public dollars going into after school. And I think this is really key because we're seeing huge growth at the state level. And to be candid, there's a lot of cuts going on in Washington. So we are worried about what's going to happen at the federal level. And as I said, this is every region of the country. When we poll voters, this is very important to them.
Jodi, what I want to ask you is put a sharper, when an old timer like me thinks about after school program, I think about, okay, rehearsals for the school play, marching band rehearsals, school sports. Those tend to be school operated ones. Talk a little bit about some creative things that you've seen that reflect really kind of innovative approaches to after school learning, if that's all right, and maybe reflect on what might the barriers be to nurturing stronger community after school programming partnerships.
Okay, that's a great question, and I could go on for hours, but I will try to be succinct. But I've seen extraordinary, every after school program, one of the greatest things is it is meant to use local resources to meet the needs of the local community, right? So some of the better programs that people may be familiar with are something like a first robotics or a coding class. I've seen kids build, solar powered cars. So, very, very easy to see some of the STEM pieces, students that do dissections. I was just at a program in Detroit and it was older youth and they were doing paid career exploration. So they were learning to be radiologists, dental technicians, fashion designers. And so, and looking at, they have a whole tech hub in Detroit, literally getting these kids to the tech hub to learn some of the exciting new developments that are happening in Detroit. I've been in rural Hawaii where there was a program that, it was a voluntary choice for kids to learn about Native Hawaiian culture and Native language, which was something not offered during the school day. So it really can span the gamut. I've seen programs for kids who could not participate in PE. They go and they partner with the local Y and they have a personal trainer and they get their PE credit because they were able to do something that was really individualized. So I think it really depends on where you live. I think, big piece of after school is we say student voice and choice. After school programs are voluntary. Students have to want to be there. Their parents have to want them to be there. So having them have a big say in what they want to do. And then I just would say that, there's a lot of sports for the non-competitive athlete and arts for the, for the kids that aren't going to be the superstars. Right. And there's a lot of thought that goes into that programming to make it both the teamwork aspect, but also to incorporate all sorts of academics into that.
Yeah. I want to remind our attendees that please pop your questions into the Q&A. We know some of you asked questions as part of our registration form. We'll try to get a few of those. We've already hit a couple of those, I think. I'm going to keep the conversation going and wait for Q&As to come in. But Jodi, I wanted to also, to me, this is the beautiful linkage between family and community engagement and after school is those families and communities, if you start talking with them, they can also be sources of ideas for the kinds of connections that somebody sits on the board of the or knows about the Parks and Rec program and says, hey, maybe we should talk to them about coming to our school to do things. And the next thing you know, people are starting to generate those ideas that have payoff. Say a little bit about, are there certain barriers from either a policy perspective or from a practical perspective to nurturing more after school activity?
Yeah, well, I did want to say the family piece is really important because another thing we find in the after school space is it may be easier for parents to meet with the educators there, right? Because they're picking their
Right.
kids up after work, or if it's a before school program, they're meeting them before. So it can be a place that really brings parents in. And we find that there's some parents that are intimidated to come into a school classroom. So the after school classroom can kind of, bridge that gap. Is also much more likely to reflect people from individual communities. So again, place where parents feel like their voice is heard, where they may feel more comfortable. If there's a language barrier, there's likely to be someone in the after school program that may speak that language to talk to them. So I think it's really important. And I think the biggest barrier is cost. What we're seeing is we've seen the lowest number of students in after school programs last time we did a household survey ever. And that was because low income parents who were scraping by to pay for these programs can't afford them anymore. So, it's cost and transportation, which of course can be solved with some resources. And it's why, and we don't need to show the slide, but we're so happy to see that there's 26 states now that have after school funding streams. We need to grow that to all 50. DC has a funding stream as well. California blows everyone else away. So, Francisco, you said it right. It shows where your heart is. But these state funding streams can make a huge difference for access for kids in local communities.
Yeah. You raised transportation. I got to imagine that can be a challenge, right? Trying to figure out how to handle, especially in your more geographically dispersed and rural communities. Any creative solutions that you've seen to how to?
I've seen a lot. So, one is, of course, using libraries, elementary schools that tend to be more centralized in communities. So Parks and Rec, so going to where the kids are. I've literally seen in Leadville, Colorado, where they have a bus that goes to, it's a trailer park where the kids live and brings the after school program to them. There's a bunch of after school programs in public housing. But then I think the older the kids get too, in urban areas, sometimes you can use public transportation and have a variety of campuses where kids are going different places. And then I've definitely seen whether it was using COVID dollars or whether it's a donation from a company, literally getting, vans, buses, things to help.
That was great. I want to go back to Maggie and Reyna, from a state policy perspective and landscape. I mean, what have you seen as some of the, you gave us a lot of examples. I'm trying to, get a little bit at those states that have been most successful. I think on the one hand, it is about money, but I think it goes beyond the financial to the, this is really important to us. Are there some examples that come to mind for you all about the real integration of that family and community engagement work leading to improved success and having a real impact on students?
Absolutely. And I think one of the challenges is there's always this desire to have a one-to-one connection between whatever the intervention is and the outcome on reading or on math. And I think that's one of the places where there are programs that have actually demonstrated that one-to-one relationship. But what we're talking about is a set of practices. It's sort of this underlying how, and there's shifts in education. I think, so we've got a lot of great examples of places where you really see things work. First of all, leadership matters. I think, not enough can be said. All those state frameworks that we talked about happen through a partnership with the Council for Chief State School Officers. The leadership from chiefs saying, this matters, let's make it happen, gave the directive to staff to come and join and be a part of the, this process and the conversation and building. So, so I think that's one of those very essential pieces. A couple states come to mind that have just had this longevity in the work and have been able to be successful, not just in thinking about family and community engagement intentionally, but really building it into the fabric of all the efforts that they're doing and carrying out throughout the state. One of them, we just hosted our conference in Denver. Colorado has just been stellar, and you see a number of contributing factors there. One of them is a piece of legislation that very clearly sets apart dollars for the work to happen, staffing to direct and guide the work, director level staffing, and a very clear charge that says this work is about our educator preparation work. This is about our reading and literacy and math efforts. This is about how we think about all the things that matter to the state. The other place where you see a lot of that is Kansas. That is just such a phenomenal story, because when parent information resource centers were defunded, the state chose to carry on the funding at the state level. And that is a massive take. I think that's the only state where the state preserved their federally funded parent information resource center, and they've gone on to address family engagement within their principal observations, within their school accreditation system, within their they have student individualized plans for high schoolers, and families are a key component in that planning. Sometimes we think of family engagement as being early childhood. It isn't. It continues. It just changes and evolves. And Kansas is a great example of that.
Yeah. Talk a little bit more, and I'll open this up to any of you, about the importance of the school leader in driving this agenda. Because, to me as a student of change management and change implementation, it's like, if someone, if the top doesn't say, hey, this is important, but also creates a climate of co-design and building a collective interest, so that people don't feel like it's oh, well, that's the principal's initiative, I don't really have anything to do with that. What does good leadership in this space really look like, and how often do you see it, and what keeps us from seeing more of it?
That question was so phenomenal, because you literally provided some of the answers with it. Some of the features that you described, are some of the first that come to my mind. The ability to, first of all, set the culture, because we will have, some of the feedback in the educator preparation work we've done that comes in from teacher candidates is that when they go in to do their student teaching, they are literally discouraged from engaging with families, and so coming into that culture, how are they supposed to learn how to engage families when the culture is already one that says, listen, we use a platform that's one-way communication only, just those types of things really matter. We know that administrators are also key in professional development and ongoing evaluation for staff. And that sets expectations for how everyone else within the school is carrying on their functions. It's budgetary. When we think about school improvement processes, when we think about having families who are informed, a lot of times when families come knocking at the door and are upset at major policy changes, there was no process to get feedback before decisions were made. So really thinking about a lot of that. And I think one of the reasons that we don't see that, and we saw this in the State of the States report, when we look at the expectations that we have for school leaders, there's very little of this across the states consistently. Some states do have very consistent and clear expectations. Most don't. And so, administrators are charged primarily with administration, and they're trained with administration. Very few are trained to be able to do this and do this well.
Paul, if I could
Yes, please.
share a little bit more clarity is so critical, clarity in what your responsibilities are at different levels. I have some resources on how to create a advisory committee and what is the responsibility of a community coordinator. Those things have to be explicit, because it's not a natural leadership practice in the world of education. And so I think you need to have different levels of support, right? Support with the site principal, with the district, right? It's how does the superintendent support their principals to be more collaborative and asking the key questions and making time, carving time to have those important interactions with communities. So, and then, so we, in California, we have regional technical assistance centers,
Right. Right.
in California, because we have 995 schools in throughout California that earned this grant, right? So we want to make sure that there are, all, if not the vast majority, are making significant inroads. So we have to have support mechanisms, right? So we have these regional centers as well as a state technical center
Yeah.
as well. So I think when you think about leadership and capacity, how do you enhance,
Right.
sustain the capacity? It has to be at all levels of the organization.
Yeah. It's kind of like a coaching model. In other words, where can I go for help? I want to do this, or we put a really great application together. Now it's
It-
time to implement. Who's gonna help, me and my team, achieve results.
Yeah,
Um,
if I could just add, because I think
yeah.
it's really essential that we think of this as seamless, right? And all these different learning environments. And there's a great chart earlier, with that structure. And so one of the worst things that I could say is if I go into a school building and the principal says to me, "Oh yeah, we have a great after school program." They come in at 3 and they don't even know who the actors are, right? Like you want the best programs, the ones where the principals are engaged, they get the teachers engaged, they get the parents engaged. The truth is, a third of the after school workforce they are teachers already, just operating in a different capacity. There might be other school employees operating as part of this. So we want this, for the sake of the kids and the parents, the more integrated it is, as opposed to in operating in different spheres, the much more successful it's going to be.
Absolutely. Right, because the more those after-school providers know other things that are going on in the school, hey, we're working on a unit about X, they can be sure to, or we're doing some reading work, and this is the kind of things that we're emphasizing with our students. They can be key partners in creating those learning opportunities that are in alignment, right? Yeah. One of the our audience has been very quiet here. I don't think I've seen a single question posted. And so I'm just going to keep going unless somebody says something. So one of the things I'm going to start with a classic NASB question is like, okay, let's say I'm a state board of education member that's on this call, or maybe I'm a local board member on this call. What's the first step I could take? What are the first things I could do to advance the cause of creating the conditions to improve family and community engagement or after school activity in the in my school or state, in my district or state?
I can jump in for after school because
Yeah, go ahead, Jodi.
that's a softball, and thank you. There are, we operate at the national level, but we have partners in all 50 states. So on our website, if you're not already interacting with the state after school network, you should be. And there's a bunch of local leaders as well that we have on that site, and they can talk to you about what exists and what doesn't exist and where the needs are. And also help really strategize about where we can put some resources, and resources may be just powerful voices to make a difference on some of the opportunities that are out there or could be out there for our kids.
No, I love that. So contact your local after school alliance and they'll help you get started, right?
Yeah. We have an amazing resource. It's called the Community School Learning Exchange. Connect with them. They have a plethora of resources to start community schools. Go to places that they've learned it. They learned the mistakes. Look at also exemplars. I left you a Garden Grove case study and how they implemented, and you really study those bright stars and try to replicate it within your
Yep.
context.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. And frankly, I'm going to say this, Francisco, and it might get me in trouble with my friends in California. But even if you're not in California, I bet if you called one of the California technical assistance centers, they'd be happy to help you, because that's just the kind of people we are in education.
You
We'll
got it.
help you no matter where you are and who you're calling, because if you want to do good things for kids, we're going to help you. We're going to help you do that. Go ahead, Reyna.
I'd love to jump on this one. I can't echo enough, Francisco, that looking at exemplars, I think, is really great. Also, though, being reflective and just having a lens as you're looking at, everything. Because frankly, I used to be an assistant superintendent at a state board of ed. And we used to say all issues are family and community engagement issues. So I used to tell my colleagues, you come come talk to me about any initiative you're working on, and we'll make connections, because we can reinforce the work that you're doing. And so I think that just approaching, whether you're looking at a budget, whether someone is bringing forward a proposal for the new state accountability plan, looking at it with an eye for how can family and community partnerships, how can we set schools up to be successful by having family and community partnerships be a part of moving this forward. That alone, and then you go and look for other places that are doing it and doing it really well.
Right. No, that's a great point, Reyna, because it's very contextualized. You live in a rural district, you might think to yourself, we don't have any employers, we don't have any community infrastructure. But once you start talking to people, you actually uncover more infrastructure than you really knew were there. It could be a scout troop. It could be, some program that the local town is running, or some parents may know some things that are happening or willing to start, a chess club or a robotics team or something like that. It's amazing what happens once you just start getting the word out and soliciting advice and counsel and information and taking an asset inventory of what's going on in our community. And build it to your context. You may not be able to do the things they do in a big urban area, but there are still things that are meaningful to your students that are on the table.
Absolutely.
We're about 3 minutes before we end. I wanted to also, and maybe Reyna or Maggie, you can comment on this. I mean, one of the principles undergirding some of the parent engagement stuff is like meet people where they are. And I remember seeing a really great program where teachers were actually doing, coordinating with families so that we'll meet you at your house or at your local McDonald's or something, whatever it takes to help you understand that we have a shared valuing for your student success. And we want to build a relationship with you. Because one of the questions we got was how do you engage those who are unengaged? And I think that's a legitimate question that we all wrestle with. Do you want to say a little bit about those kinds of strategies?
Yeah, I could jump in on that one and, very quickly, to be mindful of time. I put a link in the chat box to what we call our family engagement core competencies. And we think a lot about what it really means for a family-facing professional, whether you're a family liaison, a teacher, an administrator, a principal. What do you really need to do? What are the knowledge, skills, and dispositions to engage families effectively? We often say that there are no hard to reach families. It's more about, how are we really reaching out to even those who are most underserved, and how are we making sure that everyone has, an opportunity to be listened to, and to be part of the conversation. And we really think about our core competencies in 4 ways: reflect, connect, collaborate, and lead. So how are you constantly looking inward at your own assumptions around families? And how are you shifting your mindset to understand what families do? How are you connecting and reaching out? How are you collaborating and co-constructing and leading together? And, within that are things like the parent-teacher home visit project, where, it really means going outside of the school space to really put those core competencies into effect. And we get some really good data when we see, family-facing professionals doing those types of things.
Nice. All right, well, we're going to wrap. You can start by knowing that the National Association of Family, School, and Community Engagement is a resource to you. Go to their website, you'll find all kinds of fantastic stuff. You can find ways to track Maggie and Reyna down with more questions. Go to the Afterschool Alliance's website, track Jodi down if you have more questions. Francisco's always around, and we at NAFSCE can always be a conduit to help you get additional information. This is one of those areas where, again, we will always be stronger when we work together. Schools working with communities, working with families, working with the business community, the faith-based community, whomever, because at the end of the day, we know parents care deeply about their child's success, and communities care deeply about their child's success, and school communities care deeply about their child's success. And if we all leverage that care and work together, we can't help but create the conditions for all of our students to succeed. With that, thank you again for taking the time out of your schedules to be with us. Thank you so much to all our fantastic panelists and presenters. Keep up the great work all of you do each and every day in the interest of student success. Enjoy the rest of your day.